I started hearing a lot about David Garza in the late 90s when I was a late teen. I hadn't really gotten into the Texas music scene as of that point, but there was a lot of press around him at the time and a lot of talk around him in the DFW area. David Garza was raised in Irving, Texas, which is right between Dallas and Fort Worth, and I actually lived there for 8 years before I moved to Austin when I was in my 20s. He had started out in bands in Dallas like the Happy Farmers, just a local band when he was in high school. He moved to Austin and went to UT and started a band called Twang Twang Shakaboom, which was supposed to emulate the sound of the instruments that they played, like guitar and drums. And they got a pretty good amount of traction opening for bands like Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians, which were just New Bohemians at that time. David would eventually go on to start releasing album after album after album. He would put out a lot of stuff just independently, probably sell it at shows. There's this album, Eyes Wide Open, that was actually distributed a lot more widely than most of his other projects. If you're in the Texas area and you go to a music store, you might still find copies of the album on CD or even cassette. He would put out his records on his own record label, Open Wide Records. He also put out albums under the name dah-VEED, D-A-H-VEED, which was the phonetic spelling of how you pronounced his first name. He would put out albums with names like Culture Vulture, Conmigo, and this one's really good, Blind Hips in Motion. I think this is probably his best pre-major label record. He would go on to be signed to Atlantic Records in '96 and put out his first album in '98, preceded by an appearance of his song Slave on the Great Expectations soundtrack, which I love that soundtrack and I love that song, but I was so excited about all the other songs that were before that on the soundtrack that I kind of ignored that song until I started hearing it on the radio on 88.7 The Choice in DFW. They also would play Kinder, the title track of the album, This Euphoria, as well as Glow in the Dark, which after hearing those songs on the radio, on the local college station, I definitely had to pick up the album, and it became one of my favorites of the year. I remember seeing a big display at the Blockbuster Music in North Richland Hills for the album, and I was thinking, well, this looks like it's going to do pretty good, and unfortunately it kind of came and went. They promoted the album with the single Disco Ball World, which they first just put out a promo of the a radio edit of the album version, and they then put out a promo that had a radio remix, which I think is really cool. There's some alternate vocals on it, and they mixed it up to highlight the guitars and added some things here and took away some things here. I like variations, so I'm really fond of radio edits and radio remixes and remixes of all kinds. The second single of the album was Slave, which got a good review in Billboard, but aside from college radio, it doesn't seem like it did much. It didn't chart. The album didn't really chart anywhere, maybe some local charts, which I don't have access to because I don't have a Billboard.biz subscription. Another way that he was promoted is by doing a Best Buy commercial at the time, and I thought this was really cool of them when they were more into selling music, like when they had a large selection of CDs and imports, and you could just spend an hour or two going through all the different things that they had. They would promote new and upcoming artists, and David got to do a performance of the song Kinder, which is one of my favorites on the album.
I'm David Garza. You don't know me, but you will.
So step inside my new kind of love. You step inside my new kind of love.
A year after this Euphoria, he would put out Kingdom Come and Go, which was a more stripped-back acoustic album compared to the bombastic Led Zeppelin-like rock of most of this Euphoria. It was kind of split between a psychedelic rock sound and lighter, sunnier songs, along with a couple of ballads, including I Know and the final track, Flower, which is just kind of a very retro 50s sounding song to me, and it's a great way to finish out the album. The next Atlantic album was Overdub, which continued the electric rock tradition of the first album, but also went to a lot more of a classic rock, somewhat middle of the road record, with the exception of the two singles. Say Baby was the first single, which is this R&B-ish acoustic song that has a nice laid-back groove, which is about the perils of getting on the radio, basically. You have to say baby.
Baby, 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 baby.
I remember Spin Magazine had an advertisement. It had a picture of the album, and then it said David Garza's new single, Say Baby, and then below it, in smaller print, it said from his new album, Overdub, which I thought was really interesting. It still didn't really get any radio play, which I thought was sad. Like, even in Dallas, I don't think I heard that song. The second single, though, Too Much, although also not much radio play. I saw the video a lot in certain... I saw the video on MTV, I think, on 120 Minutes, and the channel Trio played it a lot. I don't know if anybody remembers that really awesome channel that loved Tori Amos and David Garza and a lot of artists that I really liked. If you bought the CD for Overdub, it also came with the files for a secret album called Underdub, which was, it sounds like demos from Overdub. Oh girl, what you doing? Overdub would end up being David's final major label album, and he went full-on independent after that, and I do not blame him whatsoever. He would put out just one-off indie releases, including this self-titled album that I found in the Cambridge area of Massachusetts at a record store there, and his Summer Songs series, which he's been doing for decades. This is Summer Song 6. This was the mid-2000s, and he sells those mainly at his shows. Those and a lot of his other albums you can't find on most streaming services. He just sells them on his website and at his live shows. So if you have a chance to see David Garza, I'd recommend it. It's a great show. He would also put out this album called Dream Delay that came out in 2008, and it was recorded at Sonic Ranch in Tornillo, Texas. His involvement with Sonic Ranch seems to have really attracted some A-list talent to reach out to him or work with him. This album, Dream Delay, has Al Jorgensen on it and Fiona Apple, and he would go on to co-produce Fiona Apple's Fetch the Bolt Cutters with her and would be in her band and write a lot of those songs. And I think, yeah, most of them, a lot of them. So, as an independent Texas artist, he's done pretty well for himself. I would like more people to know him and to know his music, and I'd love for this Euphoria to come out on vinyl one of these days. So Atlantic, or whoever owns that now, please look into it and check out this Euphoria and Overdub on all the streaming platforms, and let me know what you think.